All right, here we go, folks. Let's get rolling. We have about 20 people watching right now, so that's pretty good turnout, I think. Hopefully, we can get a couple more stragglers, and we'll go from there. So tonight, this shouldn't take all that long because when it comes down to it, we are it's really just one unit, one little topic here: the Age of Discovery and Exploration. So let's just talk about the quiz and the test. Let me know that you can hear me too. You should be able to. Cool. Okay, so now that we know the audio is working, so the quiz, we're calling it, right, is 34 questions, so it's a little bit less than last time. It's multiple choice again, nothing different. Same rules apply. It is multiple choice. It is not retakeable, but you can do corrections. So it's the same kind of deal as last time, right? So really, it's just one set of notes. So this should, again, take not that long to run through all the information. So I'll kind of give you the extra credit in the middle here somewhere, but we'll get started first. Okay, so let me drag this over. All right, so we are talking about the European Age of Discovery, right? So it is, oh wait, 1 second. I want to get the webcam up. There we go. Now you should be able to see me too. So Cyril's asking, is it hard? I don't think it's particularly hard because when it really comes down to it, if you watch the other review video, this is like 14 minutes of lecture. It's not really all that long at all. We're maybe getting a little in depth into spots because we are asking 34 questions on 14 minutes here. But let's get rolling, right? So the Age of Discovery, right? So we know that for centuries leading up to this point, the Europeans had traded along the Silk Road with Asia, right? We did that. We did our little map on the trade routes and things, right? The thing, however, is that during the late Middle Ages, the economies of Europe are going to really begin to change a bit. You're going to look to get increasing trade with markets in Asia, but when the Byzantine Empire falls completely, and you get the fall of Constantinople, their capital, right, falling to the Ottoman Turks, the Islamic Empire here. They're not going to play nicely with the Christian Europe, right? And they're not going to really allow those people the Christian Europe to kind of travel now through their lands very easily, right? Without really hassling them. So you're now going to get these European nations looking for other ways to increase that trade and to keep that keep all of that wealth generating and keep that wealth coming into their country. So how they do that, they look toward the sea, right, and the ocean, bringing in maritime trade, right, trying to now expand the trade through the boats and things that we talked about in all of our inventions, right? So here's Europe. You have Istanbul right here, which it becomes Istanbul following the fall of Constantinople, but this is where the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Turks are going to be here, at this point. So it's really blocking that easy access, into Eurasia, into the east, right? So we know the Silk Road and the ancient trade routes kind of are here, right? So the Silk Roads, they go roughly through up here. You have the sea routes, the ancient sea routes, going along here. You're not going to really be asked specifically what are the trade routes, like you did on the map. But you should generally know of like the Silk Roads, right, and such, for sure. So why were they interested in discovering these routes, right? So to keep the trade going, for starters, was a big part of this, right? You had demand now in Europe for gold, for spices, and other natural resources. People, if they could make money, they're going to be looking to make money, right? You also have some other things like supporting the spread of Christianity, right? So after the Crusades and the Reformation, the whole idea of spreading Christianity is really taking front and center here, and people are looking to do this to areas of the world that are not Christian, right? And then lastly, you have the political and economic competition between the different empires, right? So France in particular is trying to be more wealthy and more powerful than, say, Spain and England, right? And ultimately, that is what these people are looking for, right? They're trying to figure out the way to best get the advantage, and if that's finding a new trade route or building new ships that's what they're doing, right? They're trying to do all these. So you have your triple G, right? Your gold, your God, and your glory. Those are things you should remember, and you should be able to bring, compartmentalize that all into those, right? So gold is just the wealth and the resources. God is the religious purposes and spreading Christianity, and glory is the political competition, right? So are you going to need the important figures and the inventions? I would say you should be familiar with these, right? We did projects, we spent the day on these, and then we, for the people, there aren't a crazy number of them either. So if you're going to make flashcards, make, 10 to 12 flashcards here for the items and for the people, and you should be pretty good, but I would definitely know them on for sure. So we had the compass, right? The compass is pretty straightforward. It's magnetic. You can use the compass to tell which direction you are going and make sure you are going in the straight direction, right? So that's obviously pretty big. You have the Caravel, which is the ship, right? These much more maneuverable ships that are able to take advantage of the triangular sail, the lateen sail. Which is going to be able to now travel a whole lot more easily against the wind by doing this tacking thing, which is basically kind of capturing the wind from the side and then using the rudder to swing back kind of the direction against the wind, right? So you have the Astrolabe, which is just another, and the Sextant, which are just other navigational tools in particular that are able to kind of keep you going on a straight bearing while you're at sea, and you can kind of triangulate yourself with the stars and the sun. To be able to kind of figure out your what's called latitude, right? So these things you should definitely familiarize yourself with. So there's the Caravel. I should have just kept going here. You've got your triangular sail, your lateen sails. You have the Astrolabe. You're able to kind of line it up and take the measurements. The Sextant is similar as well, for sure. So the first big kingdom that's going to really take off here is going to be Portugal, right? So we think of Portugal as a relatively small country today, and it is, but back then it was one of the major players on the global stage here, for sure. They were a maritime nation, right? They are on the Atlantic. I can go back to my map here. Portugal's here, right? So it's right on the Atlantic. Lisbon is pretty well situated down toward Africa, and that's the way they're going to go, right? So in the middle of the 1400s, you're going to have this man named Prince Henry the Navigator. He's going to play this pioneering role. He is this prince. This whole idea of a navigational school has kind of been debunked at this point, to be honest, so I really should change that. But when it comes down to it, not so much a school, but think of him like a modern day Elon Musk almost, or ancient old time Elon Musk. He has all this wealth. He has this interest in navigation and exploration, and he funds it, right? So he pays for people to do it, pays for the inventions to try to improve them and things like that, right? So he deeply encourages Portuguese exploration, in particular of the coast of Africa, and working their way down Africa and then ultimately around the southern tip of Africa and the Cape of Good Hope, right? So his money and his influence and his passion for this is really what's pushing Portugal here for a little while, right? So think of it like Elon Musk, right, who has all this money privately that he's putting into things like SpaceX, right, and exploring the space versus exploring Africa, right, and the Atlantic Ocean, and that kind of thing. So hopefully that's a good modern day connection you can make to this guy. He's this kind of financier, right, in addition to his political role, for sure, right. So here is the map, right, of Portugal's influence. So they're going to basically kind of work their way around Africa, and they're going to work their way up into Western India, and then ultimately up into the East Indies a bit as well, and even Japan. So they are going to really start spreading their influence. They're going to be pushing trading posts, right, all along the western coast of Africa, up in the eastern coast of Africa, eventually into India and through there, spreading their influence as much as they can to try to then create those trade links, right, to be able to bring that wealth back to Portugal, right? Hopefully that makes sense. So the thing is when Portugal starts to really do this, other countries are going to be looking to do this as well in that competition's sake, right? That God, gold, and glory, gold, God, and glory, however you want to list them. So that the whole competitive side with the other nations, right? Nation states, kingdoms, they are. It's going to really start to kick off, right? So you're going to have other countries now beginning to really seek this out as well, right? So you're going to get these trading posts in the Americas, in Africa, and Asia. And you're going to get colonists beginning to make their move. So now we're talking kind of post-Columbus, right? Columbus has made his way to the New World. He's in 1492. He sails the ocean blue, right? And he is, with that, the whole Spanish Empire is going to kind of radiate out from the Caribbean and then into Mexico and in South America. So you're going to then have colonists following that up, right? People that are looking to make money off of this and these ventures, right? So they often carry their religion with them, whether it's Catholicism or Protestantism, right? And often these indigenous peoples that are living there are going to be attempted to be converted, right? Sometimes that goes fairly smoothly, other times it doesn't, and you're going to get some conflict in these particular areas, right? So we know of Cortez, right, and the demise of the Aztec, and Pizarro with the demise of the Incan empires, in the 1500s. You're going to also now have a forced migration of many Africans into slavery, right? So this is just kind of pretty generally speaking right here, right? So when diseases and things run rampant in Mexico and in South America because these natives in particular just didn't have the immune systems to handle some of the European diseases, right? The Europeans who were looking to basically enslave these people and use them for forced labor, when they can't do this anymore and the natives just there aren't as many of them left. You're going to have 90 to 99% of these natives are going to be killed by diseases. So when we get to that point, right, they start deciding they're going to really bring Africans over for slavery, right? And you're going to have colonies also kind of begin to imitate the culture of their mother country or father country, right? And the social patterns and things like that, they're going to try to bring with them what they're comfortable with and what they know, right? And ultimately, there will be deviations and things kind of changing, but over time, right? So initially, they're going to try to mimic their home country as much as they can with architecture and social things and religion, right? And all of these things. So we know there are the slave trade, right? We've talked about it. Miss Skipperman talked about it the other day. The slave trade is going to largely be a Portuguese at first, kind of running that slave trade with their exploration of Western Africa, before it kind of becomes more of an international kind of venture, if you will. So you're going to have a bit of an impact on Asia as well. So you're going to get colonization of merchants in Asia, in India, in the Indies, in China, right? You're going to have trading companies also beginning to become this thing, right? So this isn't always country-led, right? Often some of this exploration is being done by people that are looking to make money, and they're trying, and that's what's going to kind of lead the way often. So you're going to get this triangular trade, right? So you're basically going to have manufactured goods here created in Europe with the beginnings of kind of the early industrial revolution, an age of industry. And they're going to bring those things down to the western coast of Africa here, where they're going to often trade. They're going to trade with people on the western coast who had kind of raided the interior typically. And they're going to basically sell slaves to the Europeans, and then the Europeans are going to take those slaves over to the Americas, which those slaves would then either be brought up into, America proper, or down into Mexico, or even down into South America. The Caribbean is going to act as this hub, and then it'll be spread out from there. And then they'll take kind of these raw materials and resources from the Americas, right, from the Western Hemisphere, back to Europe, where they then manufacture them into things, and they kind of repeat the cycle, right? It would be silly to make any of these journeys, which would take weeks and weeks, on with an empty ship, right? So that's what they're trying to not do. So the triangular trade, you know, it's often this rum, sugar, cotton, tobacco, and all these things going, you know, to Europe where they and lumber and things like that, right? Where you're going to then have pots, pans, and guns and alcohol kind of created up here. Horses to Africa too, and so on. You can read some of the, obviously you can read for yourselves, right? So you're going to now have this linkage, right, between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Often, you know, slaves, sugar, and rum. I was just kind of talking about. You have access to these links, so if you want to check them out yourself on your own time for your studying, that works, obviously. So I'm going to take this moment, and I'm going to tell you what the extra credit question is going to be. So the extra credit question, again, just because I'm the cross-country coach here, it's going to be easiest for me to kind of come up with questions related to that. So I'm going to ask you, where is the cross-country meet this coming weekend? So the cross-country meet this coming weekend is going to be in Cary, North Carolina. So it's C-A-R-Y, North Carolina. So that's your answer. So that's gonna be your hopefully extra credit. So if you're paying attention, great, good for you, and you get an extra free point there. So here's the thing, right? Now that you have Columbus, that has kind of opened up this trade back and forth and this travel back and forth between the old world over here and the new world over here. Hopefully you guys can kind of make sense of all of this, right, with your menu that you were creating. With the menu you were creating for sure for class, right? So ultimately, it sets off a chain reaction, right? You're going to have now these things that begin traveling back and forth in serious numbers that just completely change both sides of the world, right? Without question, if you're going to ask one of the largest, single most, you know, events in human history, it's the connection here of the old world and the new world for a continuous way, right? So what are some of the things that are going to be traveling from the old world to the new, right? There were no horses, there were no livestock, right? Well, there were, livestock, just not in what we think of, right? So cattle, right? No cows in the new world. There were no sheep, right? No pigs, no horses. You had things like llamas, and you had things like turkeys, and certain things were domesticated. You just didn't have some of the large livestock that we are familiar with today, right? Things like chicken, those things have been domesticated and cultivated for human use for long periods of time before this, right? So when the Europeans get over to the New World, they're going to want these things because they're just not accessible, so they bring them over and they start to run rampant, right? We're going to be talking about, tons and tons of horses and tons of cattle and things that are going to end up being wild in the Americas, centuries later here. So in similar to that, right, you've got wheat and rice and barley and oats kind of going that way to the New World, where you have things like turkey and tobacco, tomatoes, potatoes, corn, right? All these things didn't necessarily exist over in Europe. So all of these things are super important to Europe too, in particular things like potatoes and tomatoes. They're going to really actually be able to increase the crop in Europe, and it's gonna be a bit of an agricultural revolution, second agricultural revolution in Europe, bringing some of these things because it's gonna rapidly change the diet, right, and make it a little bit more diverse. Which is obviously typically a pretty good thing, be able to eat numbers of different things. But also things like potatoes and tomatoes, now I'm just kind of getting into a little more than you need to know here. They actually increase what's called nitrogen, right? They provide and put nitrogen back into the soil. So ultimately you can kind of grow certain things, right? And then as the soil gets depleted, you can still grow a crop versus having to let the soil and that field lay what's called fallow. To basically have to replenish itself, right, over a year or two. So now you don't need to do that anymore, which increases the yield, which feeds more people, and that's a good thing for Europe, right? So in the opposite, right, these diseases, smallpox, flu, typhus, measles, malaria, all of these things, they get brought over here and they just run rampant, right? So some of the upper estimates, they say, of the Native Americans, right, in the New World at this point, the upper estimates, the most liberal estimates here, we're talking almost 100 million people here in the New World, right? yes, the Americas is considered the New World, and Europe and Africa and Eurasia, it's the Old World. So anyway, right, with these upper estimates being in the hundred million or so, realistically cut that back somewhere between 50 million. There's still a ton of people in the New World, right? It's not just this open area for just ripe for the taking. And what makes it so, right, is ultimately going to be these diseases. Smallpox in particular just runs rampant through the native populations, and these areas that were very populous, you know, at the time of Columbus and some of the early exploration, just 100 or so years later with some of the early permanent settlements in North America, all those people are going to be wiped out. Just gone. These villages, you can read up some of these journals and diaries and things of some of these early explorers, and basically these villages are just found depopulated, and it's kind of sad, really. But it's just the case, right? So we're talking millions of people just being ravaged by these diseases, kind of going on in the background, right? With people not even necessarily realizing it because they just spread so quickly. So anyway. So, Cyril, smallpox has actually been eradicated, believe it or not. We have, as a human species, we have decided that we wanted to kill it and get rid of it as a disease because it was so terrible. And we successfully eradicated the disease. It still exists in lab-type conditions and things, but as a whole, between vaccinations and other efforts, basically, quarantine efforts, we've actually eradicated smallpox. So yeah, that's pretty neat and arguably one of the coolest things people have done. So anyway, moving on, right? The Columbian Exchange. We have the Western Hemisphere, right? So I just kind of talked about this on the image of the map, right? So you have corn, potatoes, and tobacco changing European lifestyles, right? European animals, horses, cattle, these things are going to change the American Indian lifestyles, right? With smallpox killing many of the American Indians, which we just talked about, okay? So, this is kind of similar to what I was saying before. I was getting ahead of myself. So Europeans established the plantation systems in the Americas, right? They are ultimately things. It starts off kind of small, but as they can get more land, right? Some of these farms get pretty large, right? And as the larger they get, the more labor that they need, right? And as they start to get a little more wealthy, or they maybe brought wealth with them to the New World, they are able to purchase labor, right? And sadly, in this case, it's going to be slave labor, right? So they're buying, and many people are buying African slaves from the slave trade, you know, we were just talking about. And slavery is pretty much based off of race, right? I mean, that's pretty much the thing, right? So initially there was enslaving of some Native Americans going on, but then when they mostly died off, that's when they looked to the solution of bringing Africans over, in particular, right? So you're going to have, in some cases, gold and silver being exported to Europe and Asia, right, from the New World. There's certain areas of the New World that had gold in particular, where other ones didn't, right? And you're going to get the gold rush later again in the 1800s in California, hence 1849. The 49ers is all about the gold rush to California, so the San Francisco 49ers. But anyway, you're going to have areas of the country of the Western Hemisphere that have some of these precious metals. That's going to really increase the wealth of some of these nations that have it, in particular Spain during this time period. Okay, so that's kind of it, really. I mean, the questions are going to be pretty much pulled directly from this. However, I just realized, give me a second. We have the guided notes, but ultimately they're not on. The explorers are not actually in here, so I need a second to get it up on the screen here. Drive. All right, so we should have our explorers, right? So you're going to be responsible for a few of these. I mean, I'll kind of clue you in, I guess, as we go, but you should know all of these. I don't think there's anyone that might not be on here in some capacity. So anyway, you have Vasco da Gama, right? He is Portuguese. He sails for Portugal. Where they're from is probably not that relevant, so I'm just going to say who they sail for here. But Vasco da Gama is Portuguese, right? And he is going to work his way. Actually, I have a better way to do this. Sorry, give me one more second here. All right, so the explorers, right? So you have Vasco da Gama first, right? So Vasco da Gama is going to work his way around the southern coast of Africa, right? From Portugal, right here. He's going to work his way around Africa and eventually go up to India. So anyway, yep. So you've got Vasco da Gama there. So let's look at some of the other people, right? So we have Columbus, right? Columbus, if you look here, Columbus sails for Spain. He's not Spanish. He's actually Italian, but he's going to get credited, you know, for the discoveries for Spain here. So he sails for Spain. He sails across the Atlantic Ocean. He ends up in modern-day Haiti, right, and Dominican Republic. So this is actually his first voyage right here. You can follow along on the website. I put this together. You guys, I mean, this is basically just text reading of what I just talked about. But so he ends up in Haiti. He doesn't even really end up in America, to be honest. But you know, that's going to still open up the new world. So you should know Columbus for sure. Our next guy is Magellan. Let's see if this opens up. So Magellan, he is a sails for Spain. His expedition is going to be credited as the first expedition to make it all the way around the world, right? So that I can tell you for sure on the test in some capacity. He's going to leave Spain. He's going to work his way. The whole fact that it opens up another picture when I go on it. So anyway, you can follow along, right? He leaves Spain and works his way around the southern tip of South America, and then works his way across the Pacific up into the Philippines, where he is actually going to be killed himself. But then one of his ships is going to be able to make the way through the Philippines, from the Philippines all the way around to Spain. So he involves himself in some quarrels of some Native Americans that he befriends, and he is killed in the fighting as a result. So who's next on our list? We have Cortez, right? Cortez is going to conquer the Aztecs, the Mexica, right? Here in Mexico. So this is just a zoomed in picture of the Aztecs right here. So this is this gonna, there we go, that's better. So you have Peru, right? So you have the Incas right here. So Pizarro, Francisco Pizarro is going to conquer, his actions are going to lead to the demise of the Incan Empire. Right, so Pizarro is also Spanish, and so is Cortez, right? So you have Francis Drake is our next one. I'm trying to make these bigger here. So Francis Drake is going to sail around the world for England, but a whole lot later. We're talking like you know, 50 plus years after Magellan here, but he will make it all the way around the world for England, and actually he will make it. So then we have, what do we got? Jacques Cartier, right? So Jacques Cartier is going to work his way into this Gulf of St. Lawrence and down the St. Lawrence River, and he is going to actually found and claim parts of Canada, right, down there, and Canada is going to expand into the New World, all the way down the Mississippi River, essentially, through the Great Lakes region. Before this is basically what the New World looked like prior to the American Revolution. So anyway. What's this one? Why is it not opening up? So I think this is just showing you Spanish and Portuguese holdings. Yep. So this is the blue is Spanish holdings in the New World as of what year? 1513 to 1790, and the green is Portuguese. But anyway, I think that's all the people you need to know. We did. Right, Da Gama goes around Africa, Columbus discovers the New World, Cortez conquers the Aztecs, Pizarro conquers the Incas, Magellan's expedition goes around the world, but he dies in the Philippines, Francis Drake goes around the world for England, and then Jacques Cartier discovers and claims large parts of Canada down the St. Lawrence River. So that should be it. I think that's everything. I know we took a little while here, probably about half an hour. But that hopefully you're going to be ready to go for this quiz tomorrow. Any last questions? Let's get them in the chat right now. Otherwise, I'm going to sign off and call it a night. and leave you guys to your studying. Remember, you can use the website to read. I already answered that question, Anna. It's in the middle here, so you might need to go back and look for it. But I did say what the bonus question was. All right, any last questions? I have no idea who Mirage FPS is. Not answering that question. As fun as it might be to play some Counter-Strike, which I assuming is what you're alluding to with your name there. All right, folks, I think that is the end. Since there's no more questions here, I'm going to call it a quits. Good luck. I'll see you guys all starting tomorrow.